Well, when I was a little boy sitting on my mama's knee.
Hello, welcome to Going Deeper. My name is Marcie Sclove, and my guest today is Annie Cheatham. This is going to be a two-part interview. Annie is a local treasure here in the Pioneer Valley. She was born in 1944 in North Carolina and grew up in Smithfield. She described herself in a 2008 interview as a social activist, a social change agent, and a networker. Annie has worked as director and co-founder of the Congressional Clearinghouse of the Future and the Future is Female project, both in Washington, D.C. And during that Future is Female project, she co-wrote the book, This Way Daybreak Comes. Annie's best known locally probably for her years at Annie's Garden Store in Sunderland and her time as director of CISA, Community Involved in Sustainable Agriculture. Most recently, Annie was working at the New England Farmers Union, and she's retired from that not too long ago. So, welcome to the show, Annie.
Thank you, Marcie.
Thank you for coming. So I've known you, I figured out, like about 25 years, and I learned so much more about you by preparing for this interview. It was really, really fun. And I'd like to start with your early years in North Carolina. And you know, you grew up in your family as a Christian, as a white woman in a segregated South. And I wondered how you think about your upbringing as far as how it informed your path. It's kind of an open-ended question. It's fine to take it wherever it leads you.
Well, it was a rural, I grew up in a rural place, so it was very small town, 4,000 people. And it was totally segregated. There were no African-American students in my school. There were signs, colored and white signs all over town. The Klan was very active in my county. I'm sure my parents knew about lynchings. I never heard about them, but I'm sure they were going on when I was there. A lot of bootlegging going on, some really good moonshine being made in my county. My father was in the tobacco business. My mother was a school teacher. So I got a sense of agriculture and farmers from my father, and I got a sense of social justice from my mother. She was, when Brown versus Board of Education passed in '54, I was 10, and she was a third grade teacher. And the decision to desegregate the school systems in North Carolina began in the elementary schools. That was the first place that anything was changed. So she was on the cutting edge there, and she was in favor of that. She thought it was a good idea. Schools were not equal in our area and our county. So all of those, so I grew up with those two people. My father was pretty conservative, though, you know, not blatantly racist. I mean, I suppose we all were. My mother would say things to me like, don't say lady, don't call her a lady. If she was a black woman, you can't, she's not a lady. Black women can't be ladies. Or, you know, we had a maid, you know, take her home in our car, and she'd have to sit in the back seat. Well, I said, why is Clovenia in the back seat? Well, because she can't sit in the front seat. None of those kinds of racial things made much sense to me growing up. And I just couldn't get it, why black people were treated differently. The ones I knew, you know, our cook was wonderful woman, an important person in my life. My grandmother, a woman worked for her for 40 years, part of the family. It, you know, the black people that I knew that my father worked with in the tobacco business were always warm and kind to me. So I just never understood the whole desegregation thing. And I always had a feeling of violence in the South. I still do. I just got back, and I still feel that kind of undercurrent there that it made me feel unsafe. So I stayed there through college. I went to graduate school at Chapel Hill, and so anyway, I taught school in Charlotte when the school system was being desegregated.
So you were part of that as well. Your mom was, and then you were.
Yeah. So what the Charlotte system was the system that had the Supreme Court case, and that was really a matter of really desegregating the schools based on busing and getting schools to be percentage, to reflect the percentage of the city or the town.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was rich upbringing. I had, I was well known and in a small town and a small school, and so I couldn't do much and get away with much because everybody would tell my mother. But anyway.
Well, it's interesting because that piece, feeling known, I think is one of the threads that informed your life and your work, because it was so important to you, like at Annie's store, for people to feel known, that you had that intention that they feel known.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had that in spades. It was very important. I think kids miss a lot of that now, bigger school systems. And, but it's I think it's critical.
I think all of us miss it.
Yeah.
The youth do, but, you go to the gas station, you don't talk to anybody anymore.
Right.
Or lots of times you go to the bank, you don't have to see anybody.
Right.
So you're not as known in your community the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved this interview that you gave in 2008, and it was a real help to me preparing. In that interview, you and the interviewer were reflecting on whether or not you considered yourself a feminist. And you said a really complex thing about yourself that I wanted to quote and talk about a little bit. You said, it's really connecting people with somebody else or to themselves to make it possible for you to grow a little bit more, to learn something new, or meet somebody who could take you somewhere else or move you along. I'm like a mother hen, that kind of putting people together, putting ideas together with people. I have a gift for knowing what will open you up and what will help you see a little bigger. That's how I would describe myself. And I can see sort of a link between that feeling known and having some kind of intuition almost about others. Does that ring true?
Yeah, my partner Ann always says, I pass her the butter before she knows she wants it. So yeah, it's that kind of anticipation and that kind of observation and looking around and seeing what people need, and then knowing I'm very good on knowing my inventory, so I know people's interests, and I just came back from 10 days in North Carolina with my family. So in conversations with them, I've talked with them about different things, so I found myself clipping magazine and newsletter articles and mailing them to them, because I just was there, so I'm freshly aware now of what they're interested in and what they're thinking about.
Yeah.
So when I have that information, I'm very skillful at connecting the dots for people.
Yeah. And your intention is to expand them, to help them grow a little bit. I mean, maybe on a more, not such a deep level, maybe it's something more, superficial, but it seemed like that was part of the work that you did with the Congressional Clearinghouse of the Future, where you brought people in. And can you tell us a little bit about that? It seemed like that was another example of bringing people together and expanding them.
I was working in Congress for a congressman from North Carolina, Charlie Rose, who's a very relational person. And also he was really pushing the House of Representatives into sort of the modern age and telling members of Congress they needed to keep their mailing lists and they needed to keep a database. And he used to go around with this big round disc, tape, computer tape, and say, if you have this, you'll get reelected. You need to be in communication with your constituents. This was 1973 or 70, 4, I forget. I think 75. And he was responsible for getting the House computerized so that they could do electronic voting. So he was right on the edge of technology and how it could be effective in making the House business more efficient, and he was a very relational person. So he was interested in the future, and he was invited by the World Future Society to make a keynote speech, and I was his speechwriter, and so I wrote the speech. And Alvin Toffler, who wrote Future Shock, was on the same bill with Charlie, and so I went to hear Charlie give my speech that I'd written, and then because I wanted to hear how he delivered that speech, so I would know how to write for him. And Alvin Toffler spoke, and I stayed for that. And it was that moment that and Charlie's interested in emerging issues and emerging technologies and his relational stuff, that I went back to him and I said, Charlie, there's some really wonderful, important ideas being discussed in this community about emerging issues. Let's put together he had already started the Congressional Clearinghouse for Women's Rights with one of his staff, a woman member of his staff. So he was good at starting these what are called legislative support organizations within Congress, and getting one of his staff people to staff it. And so he gave me a green light, and we got Toffler came down from New York and met with Charlie and me, and we began to talk about how we could structure this. So yes, it was bringing, identifying people that were out there, speaking clearly and powerfully about future issues and emerging issues, and also getting people that were really famous to come to Washington. And I mean, Toffler was the first speaker, Margaret Mead was the second, E.F. Schumacher was the third. I mean, it was a parade over a 3-year period or more of who's who in American and international ideas and thinking. So the members of Congress would come to those because they wanted to meet these people.
Oh, interesting.
And they wanted to spend time with them. And so it was, so yes, and they were changed by it. One member of Congress, I remember passing him in the hall one day, and the night before, Jacques Cousteau had been there, and somebody had said, well, Captain, what would we have to vote yes or no on everything. Well, we don't get to do any shades of gray. How would you advise us? And Cousteau thought for a minute, and he looked at the member of Congress, and he said, I would try not to do anything irreversible. So the next day, I'm walking down the hall, and there comes Congressman Bob Edgar from Pennsylvania. I said, morning, Bob, how are you? I'm trying not to do anything irreversible. So it was that, and that happened, those kinds of exchanges happen fairly frequently after one of those events.
Yeah.
That I would run into some member of Congress who would comment on what they had heard and how they were trying to
And
apply
was
that.
it pretty, both sides of the aisle were present? Was it Democrats and Republicans?
Yeah. Newt Gingrich was on the board, and so was Barbara Mikulski. So, you know, it was wonderful.
So that whole sense now of how divided Congress is, it wasn't like that then.
No. People were
Yeah.
engaging in thoughtful conversation. We didn't allow any press media to be there. We weren't filming or taping anything. It was a dinner. We had it on the Hill the night that they stayed in session on Wednesday night. So sometimes the vote would come up and they'd all have to get up and leave, and then they'd come back in 15 minutes. And so it was, the person speaking had to understand that that was the situation. But it was kind of off the record. I don't know if anybody would even trust that anymore.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful group, people, members of Congress who really wanted to learn and serve and
Do you think that
grow.
something like that would be possible now?
I don't know. I'm not there, so I can't speculate. I would hope so, and but I think the fear of being exposed could be challenging at this point, or somebody misquoting you the next day, you know, to somebody, and it would be hard to. Anyway, Al Gore became the chair after Charlie decided he'd done it long enough, and so I worked with him for a couple of years.
Yeah. Here in the Pioneer Valley, you had your store, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So it was a garden store, and you had gifts and lots of gardening things and information for people and how to work with all of that. But you also handed out poems, and you had that sign that we all loved so much. I remember driving down 116 and then craning my neck around to be able to see the back side of the sign, to see what the other side of the message was. So what were you communicating? What did the poems and the sign mean for you?
I love you.
Oh, wow.
That's what it meant. It was my way of saying to people driving by, I care about you.
That's so beautiful.
And I always was dissatisfied with the exchange of money for something, and especially because nobody needed anything I was selling. So there was a little bit of a vacuum in that exchange for me that wasn't completely satisfying. So that's when I came up with the idea of giving out a poem, because I wanted to give something free to people in addition to the thing that they bought. And so, you know, there were great poems about flowers and gardening and animals, and, you know, Mary Oliver, bless her heart, was a great source of poems. And then local poets like Dara Weir and Jim Tate wrote poems for me and brought them in, and other people too. So
Did you ever write poems?
No, I
during
never
that
did.
time?
No.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was lovely, and some people didn't want a poem, but I picked ones that were very accessible and not hard to understand.
Right.
But it was to say, I care about you, and I'm thinking, and I'm alive, and I'm, you know, one of the ones that I remember, I was, the day before I was cleaning out my spice rack at home. So I went in the next day and put up the sign, have you cleaned out your spice rack lately? You know, people came in and said, no, but I need to clean out my spice rack. How did you know I needed to clean out my spice rack? So, you know, it was just, it showed somebody was in there, was alive, who was doing stuff like cleaning out her spice rack, and who was thinking about you while they did it.
Right.
And so that was
Right.
the whole thing.
That's great. I want to ask you about your spiritual life, but to get there, I'd like you to talk about composting.
Well, I was one day thinking about the sign as a sort of segue from the sign to this topic. I didn't know what to put on the sign. I didn't, I was sort of dry. So I went out with a box of letters, and I was worried about money, which I often am. And I don't know, it was hard to make a living in a little retail store. So I was worried about money. So I got out to the sign, and it came to me. What is profit? I wrote on one side. And on the other, I wrote compost, leaf mold, and something else.
Wow.
And so compost is, to me, the sort of epitome. It is the profit. It is the best thing going. And, that we can put in our orange peels in January, and in June they're all this wonderful wormy brown stuff that I can put on my garden and feed all these plants. It's resurrection. I talk about it in that way. To me, it is an experience of resurrection. It is a great time of rejuvenation and restoration, and it's great. I love it. It's my favorite part of gardening, without any question. And I learned a lot about the technology of composting and the percentage of carbon to nitrogen and all that. So there's quite a science related to it. But I just, and I used to teach classes on how to compost, and I used to teach classes building compost bins, and people would come and hammer away and make a bin and somehow or other get it home with somebody's truck. And so I've been teaching people about it and talking about it for a long time.
Yeah. And your spiritual life?
This compost is kind of like compost.
Yeah.
It's got Christianity and Buddhism and Taoism, and I majored in religion in undergraduate school, so I have been interested in religion and what people believe and how they construct belief systems. I'm not dogmatic. I can't imagine dying for my religion. I go to war for my religion. I know religions have created tremendous destruction, people with their religious beliefs over the eons. I don't think like that about it. I'm reading Kierkegaard right now, as a matter of fact, and finding him fascinating, and his challenge for us to really live each moment, and where is God in each moment of the day, and that a person, how they live their life is really says everything about what they believe. And if you want to know what somebody believes, look at how they're living.
Yeah.
So that's and faith. He's writing a lot about faith, which I have a lot of faith in compost, but I haven't ever really swallowed that I'm loved by some, that everything's going to be okay, you know, that I don't need to worry about things. I still worry, and I haven't quite made that leap, that I'm held somehow.
Wow.
So I'm still working on it.
Yeah. And you're a member at Grace Church?
I am a member of Grace Church here in Amherst.
Do you sing in the choir?
I'm actually singing in the choir in Ashfield.
In Ashfield?
Ashfield Congregational Church.
Oh, nice.
We don't sing every Sunday, so I get to come down to Grace.
Yeah. So music is
Music's
part of
really
it.
important to me at church, yeah.
So getting back to the farming and agriculture part of your life, which seems very integrated in with spirit, at CISA, I want to know how the whole concept of the local hero started, because it seems like, I mean, this is my own sense of we're the center of the universe, but it seems like we all became much more aware of buying local, of eating local through that campaign. And now it's, every restaurant tells you exactly where they're getting all their food, and it's made a huge impact.
Yeah, CISA was definitely on the cutting edge of that whole trend, and it was started. CISA started in '93 with a big grant from the Kellogg Foundation, and the purpose of the Kellogg grants that year, I think there were 18 million or more over a 4-year period, was to
$18 million. Great.
18 grants were awarded for $1 million each over a 4-year period.
Yeah.
So a group in Pioneer Valley had come together to apply for this grant.
I see.
And Kellogg was wanted to develop programs in food systems for sustaining agriculture throughout the country. So there were projects in Portland, Oregon, and I don't know where they all were, but anyway, Pioneer Valley was one of them, and one of the big success stories of that group.
Very much so. And was it just under your direction? Was it like a small thing that grew larger?
Well, the campaign started when I was at Annie's in '98, and the first 4 years of the grant, the CISA there was no local campaign. There were different, from '93 to '98, there were action groups that were developing ideas. I was on one of those. A dairy action group created Our Family Farms Milk.
Okay.
That grew out of that grant and that work. There was a fiber group, and I forget what actually came out of that, but something that lasted a while. And there were others, and there was a marketing group. And the marketing group did a 1-day or 1 weekend kind of promotion for people to buy local. And it was well received. And it was, and that was towards the end of the grant, and it was time to write a new proposal for another 3 years or something. And so a proposal was submitted to launch Be a Local Hero, Buy Locally Grown, and it started in '98 with another big infusion of money from the Kellogg Foundation.
Okay, we're going to pause here and pick this up again in our second half of the show. So for now, thank you. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you for part 2.